While Donald Trump is starting to slide in the statewide polls in battleground states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, in traditional Republican states like Texas and Georgia, Donald Trump has still maintained a somewhat consistent lead in the RCP polling aggregate as of right now. Again, it's April of 2024. But so far, Donald Trump has a pretty large lead in these states. And obviously, the one we're going to talk about today is the state of Texas, because I think there's a lot to talk about here and break down when it comes to these polling averages and how the state of Texas is likely to vote in the 2024 election as per this projected margin. Because as of right now, Donald Trump is up 8.8% in the RCP polling average. Now, Texas is not really a traditional battleground state. It hasn't voted Democratic in a presidential election since 1976. But nonetheless, a lot of attention has been put to it because it has been getting a lot closer when it's come to statewide contests. And of course, in 2018, we saw Texas almost flip blue for the first time since the 1990s. And that really changed the political landscape in Texas because it sent a message to the Republican Party that they can't take one of their most important states for granted. And honestly, when it comes to the path to 270 in the White House, Texas probably is the most important state overall because its 40 electoral votes are really critical to getting Republicans to 270. Obviously, if you take Texas out of the equation, the math for the Republicans becomes very difficult. They need to start winning states like Minnesota and Maine and other long shot contests, and that's really not likely in this political environment. But we're going to talk about the state of Texas. We're going to analyze these polls and sort of compare them to previous election results and analyze how accurate these polls actually might be. But of course, before we begin, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So Texas being a double-digit Republican state in 2024 is a little bit surprising, but given the fact that Joe Biden is underwater in the state of Texas by over 20 percentage points in some polls, it really shouldn't be shocking. Now, what's shocking about this is that the state of Texas has been continually trending towards the left consistently in election cycles overall. 2022, I think, was the only buck in that trend. Of course, you saw Abbott win the governor's race against Beto O'Rourke by nearly 11 points. And, Beto was a pretty strong candidate. And when I mean strong candidate, somebody who could energize the Democratic base, possibly win over people in the middle. I mean, if you look back at the 2018 election, you can't almost win the state of Texas without winning, 2/3 of moderate to independent voters and, 99% of Democrats, and also having a turnout advantage over your opposition. Now, Republicans obviously at the end of the day won this race, but this was incredibly close, and I think this ultimately sent the message that Republicans need to start paying more attention to Texas and actually putting in get out the vote operations for low propensity Republican voters, because this isn't a state that can really be taken for granted anymore. Democrats are actually putting real money into the state of Texas. Not as much on the presidential level, but Colin Allred, who's Ted Cruz's opponent this time around in the Senate contest, is I think already outraising Beto O'Rourke in 2018 as of now, and those fundraising numbers are going to continue to get much larger for him. So Texas is going to be a big money state when it comes to political races throughout the rest of the 2020s. And with Trump up by about 9 points in the state, that basically puts him, again, if the polls were exactly accurate, about where he was in the 2016 contest between Hillary Clinton. Now, this was a pretty small margin for a Republican winning the state of Texas, because if you go back to 2012, for instance, Mitt Romney wins the state of Texas by 15 points. 2008, McCain wins by 13, and obviously Bush in 2004 wins by over 20. So, this was the narrowest margin for a Republican in the state of Texas since 1996. And of course, in 2020, Texas continued its leftward shift with Donald Trump only winning the state by 5.6. So again, closest margin since 1996. So Donald Trump has a real problem in the Texas suburbs in a way that other Republicans, barring Ted Cruz, probably don't have as much of. I mean, if we take a look back at the 2022 map, for instance, and we take a look at counties like Denton and Collin County, these are historically very conservative Republican counties. If we go back to 2012, these are counties that are voting for Mitt Romney by 30 some odd points. And, I have to preface, obviously, by saying that these counties have rapid growth. So the voters in 2012 are very different than the voters in 2024. There have been a lot more new arrivals to Denton and Collin County, massive demographic change. You have different industries in Dallas-Fort Worth attracting a lot of new people, and these people have different voting patterns. So, 2022 bucked that trend a little bit. If we take a look at the margins in these counties, for example, again, as I pointed out in 2012, Romney's winning these counties by 30 plus points. Denton County is going to Abbott 56-43, 13 points, and Collin County is going to Abbott by about 10. So pretty impressive, I guess, when you compare it to 2020, which was sort of the low point in big races. Denton County only going to Donald Trump by 8, Collin County going to him by 4. So, Abbott was able to improve in sort of suburban, exurban counties outside of large Texas cities, and that's ultimately why he ended up winning the state by double digits. And down ballot Republicans did about the same. Some did slightly better. You go to like land commissioner, Republicans are winning by 14, 15 points, something like that. But we're talking about a presidential contest which is going to have very high turnout. Something that's been talked about a lot in Texas is the Rio Grande Valley, this area of the state here. The population is about 95% Hispanic. And, historically, this area has been very Democratic for the past 100 years or so. In 2020, we saw a monumental shift away from the Democratic Party towards President Trump at the time. And, a lot of that is attributed to the fact that many analysts have said that the Hispanic voters here feel neglected by the Democrats. They feel taken for granted of. And Republicans, to their credit, actually put money and resources into outreach to these communities, and it actually paid off. A lot of these counties had shifted 38, 40 points, 25 points, so on and so forth, towards the right. And while Donald Trump didn't win most of these counties, he made them significantly much closer than they were back in 2016. Taking a look at Zapata County, for example, 52-47. You go back to 2016, 65-32. Starr County is probably the biggest shift of all of them. Hillary Clinton gets nearly 80% of the vote in Starr County. And if we take a look, of course, at 2020, Joe Biden only got 52% of the vote in Starr County. So a shift of 55 points to the right in just 4 years. A massive shift among the Hispanic community really only echoed in Miami-Dade County. Now, in other parts of the country, you did see this, but on a much lesser degree. But this isn't the uniform trend, and obviously Hispanics as a demographic aren't a monolith. You take a look at Dallas-Fort Worth, more urban Hispanics, even some in the suburbs, depending on their country of origin, tend to have different voting patterns. But, the high turnout environment that 2024 is going to have, I find it very difficult to believe that Donald Trump is going to get close to double digits in Texas, even with President Biden being incredibly unpopular, because, these voting patterns, by race, educational attainment, et cetera, don't really change. And if anything, they're going away from the GOP. The GOP is probably going to increase in their Hispanic percentage, but they're probably going to do worse with the white vote. They're going to do worse with college graduates. And in the state of Texas, college graduates, these people moving to these areas from California and other areas looking for tech jobs and work and et cetera, they're a highly educated group. And of course, they're a group that the Democrats are just better at messaging to. We really haven't seen the full effect of the post-COVID migration from California. In 2020, this was obviously in November. COVID was back in March. So hundreds of thousands of people have moved to Texas since then, because of issues like COVID, cost of living from California, etc. And that maybe could be why Texas Republicans had a bit of a rebound in the 2022 elections, especially in these areas with high transient populations. I think it's more so due to the fact that this is obviously a midterm election. Republicans were more energized. But obviously, if this becomes a consistent trend, in 2024, especially with somebody like Trump on the ballot who doesn't really bring in the wide coalition that Texas Republicans typically have, somebody like Abbott is still able to do, again, almost getting 55% of the vote when Donald Trump can only get 52% of the vote. And that's been the case both in 2020 and 2016. 52% so far has been his ceiling in the state of Texas. Greg Abbott's in recent history has been about 55% of the vote. So there's a difference between Donald Trump and your typical Texas Republican when it comes to overall margin of victory. Now, at the end of the day, I think Texas is probably going to be a single-digit victory for Trump. I don't see Biden winning the state of Texas in 2024 at this current rate, especially given his massive unpopularity. and the fact that Texas just has a very conservative electorate. You know, this is a state that is transforming politically, shifting towards the left, but I don't see Texas going blue in 2024, barring some massive political shift that honestly would probably bring other red states blue as well. States like Alaska, for example, or something like that. You'd have to see a seismic shift in the next few months in order for Texas to go blue. But, you know, demographically, you know, Democrats are building up the numbers. You have more and more potential Democratic voters enrolling every single year, and the margins in these races get closer and closer. Now, Donald Trump at the end of the day won Texas by 600,000 votes in 2020. If you go back to 2016, he won by around 800,000 votes. So that vote margin tends to narrow every election cycle. And, you know, at that rate in 2024, you could see just about a 500,000 margin vote for a Republican, or even 400,000, which would indicate, you know, probably a very low single digit race, 3-4 points, something like that, depending on the overall turnout. So at the end of the day, I think that Trump probably wins Texas by 3-4 points, something like that. I think it could potentially be even closer than 2020. And that's not because of necessarily the fact that Trump will do awful in a lot of the other swing states and in the popular vote overall, but it's the fact that Texas as a whole is moving more towards the left. And I think that Trump, you know, again, if this was 10 years ago, Donald Trump would be up 20 points in the polls in Texas easily. But, you know, Texas is a very different state than it was 20 years ago. And that's why I think Texas is going to be closer than these polls indicate. You know, back in the 2020 election, the polls actually underestimated Trump probably because he was the incumbent president. He was up in these polls by only 1.3%. He ended up winning by 5.6, 5.8 is the wrong number on RCP. So I think you'll probably see something similar with Biden, even despite the fact that most voters view him unfavorably. I think at the end of the day, you're going to have a contingent of Americans that maybe in the last weeks or so of the election vote for Biden because they're more afraid of Donald Trump. And I think that's ultimately still Trump's weakness, even though Biden is not a strong president really by any metric. He's very unpopular. Many voters view him poorly on issues like the economy, national security, obviously immigration, so on and so forth. So in theory, Biden really should be losing the state by, again, like 20 points. But Texas has a very different electorate than it did 20 years ago, a much more Democratic friendly electorate. And, you know, I think that's going to be a real problem for Republicans in Texas going into 2028. Obviously, their key to winning back the state and doing better is you have to win places like Tarrant County back. You have to take back these urban counties that were historically conservative before it's too late. You have to message to these voters that are moving from other states, from blue states, and actually run on issues they care about, because I think a lot of times Republicans run on issues that most voters just don't care about. Abortion is one of those, for example. The average median voter does not care about abortion, but when Republicans talk about wanting to ban abortion completely in all these red states, those voters might be inclined to vote Democratic just because they think that policy is far too extreme. And I think, you know, that's really the summary, or half the summary, of the 2022 elections. But, you know, ultimately, I think Donald Trump's going to underperform this number. Again, only time will tell. We'll obviously see come the general election, but I don't see Donald Trump winning Texas by high single digits. I think demographically, Texas is just too diverse for such a large Republican victory nowadays with the current coalition Republicans have. So I think we're going to see it a lot closer than RCP currently has it. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.